You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Pastor James Cleland.
Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for your support of The Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Pastor Cleland filling in for Sarah over this week and maybe some in the coming days ahead. We are so grateful for him and Sarah off spending some well-deserved time off and on some adventure, but she's going to be bummed because we have some great history to cover, and we are going back to the Reverend Dr. Joel Elowsky. He's professor of Historical Theology and coordinator of International Seminary Exchange Programs at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Dr. Elowsky, welcome back to the Coffee Hour.
Thanks. It's good to be with you again.
We recently had a great conversation about St. Athanasius, a recent commemoration. And there's another commemoration coming up on the calendar today. And we're talking about the Emperor Constantine, Christian ruler, and his mother, Helena, mother of Constantine, both commemorated by the church on May 21st. I am looking forward to digging into this because I've not really read a lot about Constantine, and I am so grateful that we have great treasures in our church like you to enlighten us on this. So what do we know about Constantine's early life?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. And I mean, it seems like we're sticking in the 4th century, which is one of my favorite periods of time in the life of the church. In terms of Constantine, by the way, we have a document called The Life of Constantine, written by Eusebius of Caesarea. So if you ever just want to kind of get a whole history of Constantine from a church father who thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, you should read Eusebius, because he really liked Constantine quite a bit. And I mean, it's kind of a refreshing thing in terms of how sometimes Constantine is viewed today, but we'll get into that maybe a little later, But as far as Constantine's early life, we don't have a whole lot of information except for kind of what Eusebius reports. I mean, he was probably born around the early 270s, maybe 271, 273. His dad was named Constantius, and of course, as you mentioned, his mother was Helena. I always thought that some of these emperors should have got baby books because, there's Constantius, Constantine the first, second, Constantinus, and So anyway, he kind of took after his dad that way in terms of his name. He was actually born in Serbia, by the way. So, that's area north of Greece, and I suppose, what's interesting about his early life, I guess one of the things, it's interesting that he probably spent a lot of the time in the East, not with his dad, but with Diocletian, the other emperor, the emperor at the time, who had kind of divided up the empire into two. They call it actually four, the Tetrarchy. But he spent most of his early life under Diocletian and his household instead of with his dad. In fact, his dad, Constantius Chlorus, actually at one point put away his mother Helena to marry a woman named Theodora, I think her name was, just because he had to make some political alliances. I don't think it had anything to do with how he felt about her. But so he spent that time in Diocletian's house, and I think Diocletian kind of used him as leverage against Constantius Chlorus, because Constantius Chlorus was a pretty powerful guy himself. So as long as Diocletian had, and I'm throwing all these names around, I realize, but at this time there was like an emperor in the west, that's Constantius Chlorus, and there was an emperor in the east, Diocletian. Diocletian did this because he wanted to kind of be able to govern his empire better. So you got these two emperors, which, sounds good from an administrative point of view, but guess what happens? People start getting jealous of each other and not trusting each other. And so I think Constantine, in some ways, in his early years was kind of like, I won't say house arrest, that's not quite it, but he was used as leverage against his dad, that way. And
kind of like during the medieval period, people did that. Kings and things. Okay.
Yeah, same kind of things. But, he would have been brought up with all the proper education, had tutors. I mean, sometimes they used tutors from Africa, like, who am I thinking of, Lactantius, for instance, and others. So he would have, his education would have been pretty secular, I think, except for the fact that his dad also seemed to be more favorable towards the Christians. I mean, you know about the Diocletian persecutions that happened. They started in 304. They went through 311. But even before that, there were some things where the Christians were not being treated well. But in the West, under Constantius Chlorus, they actually were. And he seemed to be maybe a closet Christian. I don't know, so maybe Constantine might have gotten some of that from him.
That's interesting. Okay. So what was going on in the empire at this point? Is it fractured? Is it kind of, it's not the Pax Romana anymore?
Right. Well, it's interesting because when before Diocletian, there was kind of an unstable period. You had, think around 250 or so, you had the plague of Cyprian that pretty much decimated the Roman Empire. You start having these different tribes that are coming from the north invading Rome and making it not as stable. You've got taxation and inflation on the rise. The middle class is being shafted. Sorry, I shouldn't say it that way, but they were not, they were having difficulties, shall we say. So Diocletian comes in around the 280s or so, and he brings some stability to the empire, and he brings some structure. And so he decides in that structure, like I said, not only he has a Caesar and then what I like to call a little Caesar on each side. So I like the pizza, And so he's got those in the West and he's got them in the East to kind of help with some of the administrative kind of things. And then he also appoints all these regional governors and things. It's just one big bureaucracy, but all because the Roman Empire itself had gotten so big that he was looking to kind of bring some stability to it. And I suppose in that sense, he did. But there's, like I said, the Diocletian persecution in 304 starts to make things difficult for the Christians for the next 10 years or so, or 7 years. And what ends up happening, though, in 306, which is kind of a key event, is Constantius Chlorus was fighting up there in York in Great Britain, and he's killed. So what ends up happening is Constantine, by this time, had escaped from Diocletian in the east and had gone to be with his dad there in the battle, and they end up claiming him then as emperor in 306 at York. The military does. So he's got the military behind him at this point. And as I say, this is around 306 or so. So, and you've got, then you've got him basically taking on the competition for the next 10 years or so as he fights off different challenges to the throne. You still got the emperors in the east that he has to deal with. Probably the most famous thing, though, is the battle with Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge. You may have heard of this.
Yes. Is this where he has the vision?
Yes, that's right. He has this dream and he has a vision and he sees, a cross up in the sky and even hears in Latin, by this sign you will conquer. And so he believes the vision, he believes the dream. And in fact, he even puts it on his soldiers' shields, so that he can, that's the sign by which he conquers. And back in the ancient world, if you had the gods on your side, that meant that you would prevail. But in his case, he recognized, we don't know what he recognized and when he recognized it, but he seems to have changed kind of his attitude a bit in terms of that some say he previously was a worshiper of the sun god, but now he's worshiping the Son of God, after this. But that's one of those things that scholars like to debate about how thorough was his conversion, shall we say.
Right.
So what was significant in his life that led to him being commemorated by the church?
Right. I don't think it was so much the battles, and all of that. There's a couple of things. in 313, he issues this Edict of Milan, that basically tells the Christians that, that they're no longer to be, the Christians are no longer to be persecuted. There was a previous edict under Galerius in 311 called the, like an Edict of Toleration. So things changed dramatically for Christians in the sense that they're no longer being, put to death. They're no longer being sent to the mines, but rather Constantine treats them favorably even. He does not make Christianity the religion of the empire. This is what is often kind of said that he did. That actually happened under Theodosius later, around 381 or so. But he does give it kind of favored status, including the fact that for instance, clergy didn't have to pay taxes. They didn't have to serve in the military. He also recognized that many of the churches had been confiscated by the government, and he not only returned them, he rebuilt some of them and actually refurbished them and gave lavish gifts to provide for their care. So those are all aspects of his early kind of reign that I think the church looked at quite favorably, because now, kind of everything has changed and people are starting to look at the church in a way that's attractive, shall we say, and for their social life, which of course brings both good and bad aspects to it. In terms of some people looking at joining the church so they can get ahead socially and politically and maybe even economically. But then there's the other side of it too, that lots of people are true converts as well. But if I had to pick like the number one thing that I think he is known for, at least for us theologians, we love him because he called the Council of Nicaea in 325 to deal with the issue of Arius. So that's probably what he's most known for in our circles, the fact of calling that council.
In just a little bit, we'll talk about his mother as well. But before we get to her, were there others who influenced him? We know that his mother certainly had a great influence on Constantine. Were there others that you think had a great influence on Constantine?
Well, I think the Eusebiuses, this is another one of those cases where they needed the baby book, because there's a Eusebius of Caesarea, but there's also a Eusebius of Vercelli, and then there's a Eusebius of Nicomedia. These all, Eusebius of Caesarea was the one who wrote the history about Constantine, and so he was influential. He probably was able to talk with Constantine a fair bit about life in the church and things, but I suppose it probably was his home pastor there up in Nicomedia, where Constantine had his residence. I suppose Eusebius of Nicomedia had an influence, especially after the Council of Nicaea. That the Council of Nicaea was where they decided the issue of the Arian controversy, and Constantine confirmed that initially. But then he kind of went back and forth on it, and I think Eusebius of Nicomedia actually was able to influence him quite a bit in terms of actually bringing Arius back from his exile, banishment, and even Constantine himself getting baptized on his deathbed in around 337 by this Arian bishop. So, Constantine it's an interesting history. So you ask about influence. I mean, there's Orthodox influence, but later in his life, there was also that Arian influence that I think for some of us is rather frustrating because, the Nicene Council should have settled everything, but it didn't end up doing that.
We have more to learn about Constantine and his mother as well. We're talking with Reverend Dr. Joel Elowsky today. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Pastor James Cleland.
You're a miracle. You know that, right? A living, breathing, one-of-a-kind miracle. You were created to stand apart, to share your gifts in the service of others, to make an uncommon impact in a common world. And at Concordia University, it's our mission to help you do that, to live uncommon. To learn more about Concordia, go to cuw.edu.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Pastor James Cleland.
Today we're talking with the Reverend Dr. Joel Elowsky. He's professor of historical theology and coordinator of International Seminary Exchange Programs at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. And a great resource for us when we're talking about commemorations of the church. Today we're talking about Constantine. And now moving on to the Emperor Constantine's mother, Helena. Dr. Elowsky, what do we know about Helena, the mother of Constantine?
Right, yeah. Well, first of all, we know she's somebody who the Greek and Latin churches still think about to this day. They commemorate her. So she has obviously some real importance for them. She was born probably in Bithynia, in a town called Deprenum, I think we'd say it like that. And it's interesting that her son got to rename the town for her. I mean, I'd love to do this for my mom. He called it Helenapolis. She probably came from pretty poor background, or at least they say like humble origins that way. Not any wealth or anything like that. And in fact, we know that she became the wife of Constantius Chlorus, but she was also, was she his wife or was she his concubine? That's one of the things we don't quite know which way to say about that. But as I said, and I told you that she had gotten Finan away so that he could marry and make a political marriage out of it. But what's interesting is that after her husband died, she got to go back to. Her son Constantine actually brought her back. Recalled her to court at Trier, where he actually had been for some time. And so then she was able to go back to Rome and, live her life there and kind of be the emperor's mother, even as her husband no longer was around. But she and Constantine seemed to have been pretty close that way. And you wonder one of the things, where did Constantine get his faith from?
Right.
I don't think he really got it from his mother. At least according to Eusebius, it was the other way around, that he kind of brought her to faith a bit. And so that's one of those things. I don't know. I suppose you could go with historians might go either way on that. But the fact that, with her kind of background and recognizing Constantius Chlorus as kind of, at least sympathy towards Christianity, then she came full circle, shall we say. So that by the time we're talking, in the 320s, she's a very committed Christian. And in fact, towards the end of her life, she decided she wanted to make a pilgrimage. And this pilgrimage was to the holy place of Jerusalem. Jerusalem at this time was just starting to get back on its feet. I mean, Hadrian had basically made it into kind of a backwater town, a pagan town for a century or so. So she decided she wanted to go there, and the places where the key events of Christ's life, they were actually marked out because Hadrian had put temples. I think I mentioned this with Athanasius earlier, that they had put temples to the pagan gods in each of those places. So the Christians could actually find, where, let's say, Golgotha was, for instance, or Bethlehem, and, where Christ was born and these things. Or at least that's what, the tradition had said before. So, go ahead.
Does she end up building any churches there? I think I remember hearing stories of her almost like an Indiana Jones, like finding sites and unearthing things and helping build churches, etc.
Yeah, I think she even wore a fedora, just like he did, with a whip.
Yeah.
And she came out. Actually, I mean, the one that, and this was already kind of preserved by St. Ambrose, this story that, she was taken up onto Golgotha. And while she was there looking around, as she discovered a piece of wood that she believed was a piece of wood of the cross. And so they have a church. And then they built a church on that spot, and they built the Church of the Resurrection. And she was instrumental in her son building a number of churches there in Jerusalem, but also back in Rome, too. And of course, the church today is called Santa Croce, where, in Rome, where she actually put that piece of the cross. Of course, what's interesting about that afterwards is there are so many pieces of the cross found that they probably could build a cathedral, but that's another issue.
Okay, so what kind of, I get the legacy that she had. That's kind of a really cool one. What kind of legacy do we have for Constantine himself? One of the terms I've heard thrown around is Constantinianism.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what that is? Because I'm still a little confused.
Yeah, well, in fact, there's even a book out there called Defending Constantine by my friend Peter Leithart, where he felt Constantine needed a bit of defending in the sense of, just what is his legacy? Because when he kind of aligns the church with the empire pretty closely. I mean, he's even kind of called like a bishop of the, I forget what the term is, but it's like a bishop of those outside. what was that? So anyway, those outside of the church, he was their bishop in a sense. So you have him giving, breaks to the Christian clergy. You have him building churches. You have him even like establishing Sunday as a day of rest.
Mm-hmm.
He is involved with that as well, and these kind of things. So I suppose. But the other side of it is, well, did he make the relationship a little too close? And the fact that, the church seems to almost be, taken over by the empire in some ways, or co-opted. Maybe that's the term, And so was Constantine good for the church? Well, the jury's still out on that in the sense of the fact that they did become that closely aligned, I suppose. But the other side of it is, that, when you see him at the Council of Nicaea, for instance, you can see that he was a person who definitely cared about the faith. He himself asked some questions at the council at times, even though he would defer to the bishops. But and he's probably the person responsible to get the term homoousios, of one substance, with the Father that we use in the Creed. He's probably the one who was instrumental in getting that introduced through his Bishop Hosius of Cordoba from Spain. So. There are those who would say that the church basically, after Constantine, went downhill because it got so aligned with the state that pretty much, became it lost that kind of edge that it had before Constantine. But the other side sees that really he was instrumental in helping to resolve probably one of the key issues of the early church in dealing with Arianism, and the fact that he did provide for the churches many of the things that we now take for granted in terms of structures and favoritism in some ways, I suppose. So, what I would say, I suppose, is it depends on what your concerns are to a certain degree. So that's not a very satisfactory answer, is it?
That was very helpful. There was a good nugget in there of the term, and I won't try to repeat it because I'm sure I'll mispronounce it. That was it was homo.
Yeah, the homoousios.
Homoousios.
Yeah. Which basically means of the same essence, kind of thing.
You mentioned other things like that that his legacy impacts that we perhaps are that we take for granted. What's even just one thing that if you were to look around today, you would say, wow, that we have that, or that was significantly impacted by Constantine's leadership?
Well, just from my own personal kind of thing, his edifice evangelism, as I call it, just in the sense of what kind of a building program he did do, and kind of established these beautiful churches to glorify and give praise to God, which again, of course, some people would see that as, well, then they stop taking care of the poor and these other things, which I suppose is not true. But I would put that as one thing. And then the other would be just the fact that, kind of this relationship between, looking to the churches, that's important, probably more of a negative thing. I better not go there. Let's leave it at the edifice evangelism. And, I suppose, and the aspects of just the beauty that, is associated with worship and life, and how Constantine and his mother both, felt that this was an important aspect of church life that they wanted to give glory to God for. And he shows the life of a sanctified layman who, really sought to serve his Lord in his vocation. I do think that he was a genuine convert. Some don't think so because he saved his baptism until his deathbed. But, most of them did that because they felt that sins committed after baptism couldn't be forgiven in some cases. So I think that's more of the reason he did it. But,
okay.
Very good. Well, thank you for the insights, and man, such a great history lesson right there. Now you're excited about taking a class with Dr. Elowsky, aren't you?
I am. I'm going to ask a lot of questions about Constantine.
Well, there you go.
Reverend Dr. Joel Elowsky, Professor of Historical Theology and Coordinator of the International Seminary Exchange Programs at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Dr. Elowsky, thanks so much for being our guest on the Coffee Hour.
Well, thanks. My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Pastor James Cleland.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.